Carrie, so lots changed with COVID-19. Tell me how it sort of changed strategy and your clients' business goals.
Yeah, great question. And I think the first and foremost is really the reset on customer behaviors, right? If you think about yourself, everything's changed in terms of, how you commute, the way you shop, the way that you go about your daily activities has completely changed. And so all of those behaviors and those different sort of actions, activities, and movements, I think have really changed the way that clients need to think about how they reach their customers. They're not in the same places that they were several months ago. I think that's one certainly big one. And then I think the second one that we're seeing clients focus on is really needing a lot of flexibility and agility in terms of how they place their media right now. If you think about what happened, massive cancellations of media when we first went into lockdown, I think a lot of resetting and thinking about how to be able to re-enter the market, when would the right time be, and a lot of national advertisers who suddenly had to think like local advertisers when we maybe had closures in different states or different parts of the US, and then maybe reopening at different times and having to think about how do I support sales in different parts of the country that might not be all open at the same time. So I think that flexibility, agility to be able to go in and out of markets, start and stop media when they needed to, was really something they had to think about a lot more discreetly over the course of this year. And then I'd say the third one is really a heightened focus on measurability, performance, and really, again, with sort of limited amount of marketing dollars, a few kind of unknown times when consumers are going to interact, and kind of going into these uncharted waters, really needing to know that your marketing dollars are performing well and which things are performing well in this whole new environment.
Yeah, which sort of leads us to a follow-up question. What data is critical to measure success, and what are the tools that you're using? What are the sort of metrics and that your clients want, and how do you analyze business outcomes?
Yeah, so great questions. I think, we saw this trend starting even before there was the pandemic, which was a real heightened interest by clients and marketers to really understand their first party data, understand their customers better. And that really just intensified with what happened with the pandemic, because as we were just talking about, when you have all these customer patterns suddenly change, if you were targeting a zip code where, a bunch of office buildings were, and that's how you were targeting your key audiences, now they're diffuse. Now they're all over. They're back at their homes, or like me in an apartment somewhere out in the suburbs. So, the traffic patterns have been completely disrupted. The purchasing habits have been completely disrupted. So to be able to still find me, you might have been doing it through a geographic net, or maybe some kind of zip code net maybe before from where I work. Now you have to find me in a whole different way. And so I think that idea of knowing me at a personal level, at an individual level, and then being able to market to me with any of my new behaviors, however I'm going about those, has become really, really important. So that first party data, knowing your customer, I think is really of critical importance. And then I think, the other part of it is just, being able to then at the end of the day, figure out if those interactions are meaningful. So, right, you might be able to get to me, but I think, the performance piece that we talked about and that measurability and needing to have that piece is, how do I close that loop? How do I understand if I actually did come and make that purchase at the end of the day, after I interacted with your ad, after I got the coupon, after I got the whatever it was, come back for reopening message from you? Did I actually walk into the store? Did I actually make a purchase? Did I make a recommendation? Did I come spend time with you as a brand? Having that closed loop and that ability to be able to bring any kind of performance or purchase data back in to close that loop. I think that's the other critical piece of information, is to be able to tie those two pieces together.
Carrie, what about best practices for folks who aren't your customer? Finding incremental performance from new customers. What are some of the strategies there?
Yeah, so I think a few things that we've seen is a real focus, as we talked about, on being more performance minded, or even, we talked about the risk and the smaller and budgets that are going to the marketplace now, and a real pressure to know if they're performing. And so what we're seeing now is that, that focus from the clients to really make sure that they're getting their arms around the first party data, but also becoming more commercially savvy in the way that they're placing their money into the marketplace. So it could be things like really thinking flexibly about how are they leveraging things like, should they put more or less money into the upfront, right? Where that might be changing their way they think about having to have flexibility in their spending. It might make them think about, how much they put into national versus hold back for local efforts. It might be putting more into digital channels in order to think about how that movement and those patterns have changed in terms of how people are interacting with them from a media standpoint. So, one of the things that we're seeing is clients asking for, how do they de-risk the spend that they're putting into the marketplace right now? So one is by being smart and being very hyper targeted, as we talked about, to those first party audiences. But the other is, can we in some way as media partners de-risk that or guarantee outcomes to them? And you're seeing a lot more performance guarantees. And we've actually started doing a lot of that this year, which is helping to de-risk that investment for clients and say, for a specific amount of spend, you get a certain amount of outcomes. And that could be not just lower funnel outcomes. It could be something in terms of reaching a certain target audience, having them come in and interact with you on a landing page. And it doesn't have to be just digital either. So really thinking across all media channels, all steps of the funnel to guarantee more sort of performance and certainty each step along the way, and then being able to tie that back to the customer back at the end of the day. And that means, of course, getting your data house in order and having a really good sense, whether that's investing in a DMP, a CDP, the combination of the two, knowing your audiences, having that analytics suite to be able to close that loop and give you true performance data at the end of the day to know if your media is really performing.